The gas station stood like a lonely outpost on the edge of Highway 70, its bright lights cutting through the darkness of the night. 7 miles from the nearest town, it was the only sign of life for miles. Carla pulled her grey Toyota Camry into the station, her body heavy with exhaustion after hours of driving. The thought of a cold drink and a full tank of gas was the only thing keeping her going. She stepped out into the warm night air, the faint smell of diesel mixing with the eerie stillness around her. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow on the pavement, making the scene feel almost surreal. Carla adjusted her purse on her shoulder and began refueling her car. Her mind wandered, replaying the events of her long, tiring day. The rhythmic sound of the gas pump was almost soothing, a small moment of calm before she faced the remaining miles home. But the calm didn't last long. The low rumble of motorcycle engines broke the silence, growing louder with each passing second. At first, Carla thought it was just a group of travelers passing through. But as the sound grew closer, the vibrations seemed to shake the ground beneath her feet. She glanced up and saw them, 6 bikers rolling into the gas station. Their headlights cut through the night, and their bikes lined up in perfect unison. Each man wore a leather jacket adorned with patches Carla didn't recognize. She felt their eyes on her immediately, their stares heavy and unnerving. Her hands tightened slightly around the pump handle, but she kept her face neutral, pretending not to notice. One of the bikers, a tall man with a scruffy beard and mirrored sunglasses, swung his leg off his bike and muttered something to his friends. They all laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Carla couldn't hear what was said, but the intent was clear in the way their laughter carried through the air. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her nerves. Her only goal was to finish refueling, pay, and get back on the road. As she replaced the pump and headed toward the small store to pay, she heard the heavy thud of boots hitting the pavement behind her. Her heart quickened, but she didn't let it show. She kept her stride steady, her chin held high, and stepped through the glass door into the store. The cashier, a young man who looked barely out of high school, gave her a brief nod before returning to his phone. Carla felt a small pang of unease, but she quickly corrected herself. It wasn't unease. It was caution. She didn't want to make assumptions, but something about the biker's energy felt off. Inside the store, Carla grabbed a cold drink from the fridge and approached the counter. As she paid, she glanced out the window and saw the bikers gathered near her car. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew she couldn't let fear take over. She had to be smart, be bold. What happened next would be unforgettable. Carla paid for her gas, grabbed her drink, and stepped back outside. The bikers were waiting. The tall man leaned casually against his bike, his arms crossed, watching her with a calm but unsettling gaze. His buddies flanked him, their postures relaxed, but their eyes sharp and piercing. Carla felt the air shift, the tension thickening as she walked toward her car. She held her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse, the only outward sign of her unease. As she passed them, their low murmurs reached her ears. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to send a chill down her spine. Something in their voices told her this wasn't over. Her car was just a few feet away, but the distance suddenly felt like miles. She could feel their eyes on her back, their whispers growing louder as she walked past them. Her grip on her purse strap tightened, but she didn't let her pace falter. She had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, his voice slick and mocking. Carla didn't turn around. "Too good to say hi?" Another one jeered, followed by a chorus of low chuckles. She reached her car door, her keys already in hand. Sliding into the driver's seat, she locked the door with a practiced flick of her thumb. The sense of relief was fleeting. Through the windshield, she saw the men still standing there, watching her with expressions that felt like a dare. As she started the engine, one of the bikers stepped forward. His boots crunched against the gravel, and his face twisted into an unpleasant smirk. He was shorter than the others, but carried himself with an exaggerated bravado. Carla didn't need to hear his words to know he had no intention of being friendly. "Where you headed in such a hurry, huh?" he said, slapping a heavy hand on the hood of her car. The sound echoed in the quiet night. Carla's heart skipped, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she looked him straight in the eyes through the windshield, her face unreadable. She considered driving off, but something told her that would escalate things. These men wanted a reaction, and Carla wasn't about to play into their hands. The tall one with the beard strolled forward next, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting her image back at her. He leaned casually against the driver's side door, forcing Carla to lower the window slightly. "Didn't your mama teach you manners?" he drawled, his tone dripping with false politeness. "We're just being friendly." Carla's voice was steady, but there was a quiet steel in it as she replied, "I'm not looking for trouble." The words hung in the air, a clear boundary she was drawing, but the bikers didn't seem to care. The tall man smirked, his sunglasses hiding his eyes but not his arrogance. "Trouble?" he said, feigning innocence. "Who said anything about trouble?" Carla's mind raced. She knew she had to stay calm, but the situation was escalating faster than she had anticipated. The shorter biker was still standing by the hood of her car, his hand resting on it like he owned it. The others were closing in, their laughter now laced with something darker. Carla's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She had to think fast. What she did next would determine how this night would end. "Just passing through trouble?" The man echoed, feigning surprise. His voice was laced with mockery, and his mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but not his arrogance. "Now, why would you think we'd cause trouble?" Behind him, his friends erupted into laughter again, the sound grating against Carla's nerves. She could feel the tension thickening around her, her instincts screaming at her to stay calm. She'd been in situations like this before. Maybe not as blatant, but she knew the signs. The man's smile turned cold as he leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. "You don't belong here, lady. You know that, right?" The words landed like a punch. Carla's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles whitened, but her expression remained composed. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Behind her, another one of the bikers approached the back of the car, tapping lightly on the trunk as if to test her patience. It was a game to them, a cruel, calculated game. "Hey, maybe she needs directions," one of them sneered. "We could show her the quickest way out of town." The cashier from inside the store peeked out briefly, but quickly disappeared behind the counter again, clearly unwilling to intervene. Carla's jaw tightened. She was on her own. But as the man at her window smirked, something shifted in Carla's mind. A flicker of resolve told her she wasn't going to let them dictate the outcome of this night. Carla took a deep breath, steadying herself as the biker's laughter echoed around her. The man leaning against her window tilted his head, studying her like a predator sizing up prey. She could feel the weight of their confidence. This wasn't the first time they'd tried to intimidate someone like her, and they seemed certain it wouldn't be the last. "Let me ask you something," the tall man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What makes a lady like you think she can just stroll through here without saying hello?" Carla's calm demeanor didn't waver as she spoke, her voice firm but low. "I already told you I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to be on my way." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "See, that's where you're wrong. You already found it." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Carla's mind raced. She knew she couldn't outrun them, not with their bikes surrounding her car. She also knew that showing fear would only embolden them. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where she saw the biker at the back of her, car still tapping on the trunk, his grin wide and menacing. The others were closing in, their laughter now laced with something darker. Carla's grip on the steering wheel tightened even more. She had to think fast. What she did next would determine how this night would end. She glanced at the gas station's store where the cashier had disappeared. No help would come from there. She was alone, but she wasn't helpless. A plan began to form in her mind, a risky one, but it was her only shot. She took another deep breath, her resolve hardening. These men thought they had the upper hand, but Carla was about to show them they were wrong. One of the bikers kicked a loose stone, sending it skittering across the pavement toward her car. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet night, a deliberate attempt to unnerve her. Another biker circled to the passenger side, his boots crunching loudly against the gravel. Carla's pulse quickened, but her outward composure remained steady. She wasn't going to let them see fear. Her phone sat on the passenger seat, and she suddenly reached for it, her fingers brushing against the screen. But before she could pick it up, the tall man's hand slapped the roof of her car, making her flinch despite herself. Ah, he said, shaking his head. Ain't no need for that. The others howled with laughter, emboldened by the shift in power. Carla clenched her teeth. She knew she had to think fast, but she also knew she couldn't afford to act rashly. These men were looking for any excuse to escalate, and she wasn't about to hand it to them. As the man beside her window leaned in closer, Carla met his gaze head-on. Her voice, though quiet, carried a weight that caught him off guard. "You don't scare me," she said simply. The laughter stopped for a moment. The night seemed to hold its breath. The man straightened, his expression darkening, as if her defiance had challenged the very core of his authority. His buddies exchanged uneasy glances, the sudden silence unsettling even to them, but it didn't last. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, broke the tension with a sneer. "Big words, lady. Let's see if you can back them up." He stepped toward the car, but Carla was already moving. Before he could react, she rolled up her window and locked eyes with the man still leaning against her door. Her hand shifted to the gear shift, her intention clear. "I said," she repeated, her tone razor-sharp. "You don't scare me." The tall man's lips curled into a smirk, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his mirrored sunglasses. He took a step back, his bravado faltering. Carla used the opportunity to shift into reverse, the sound of her engine roaring to life. The bikers scattered slightly as her car lurched backward, gravel spraying under the tires. Carla's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, where she saw the wiry man with the snake tattoo stumbling out of the way. The tall man shouted something, but his voice was drowned out by the engine. Carla's hands were steady on the wheel, her focus absolute. She wasn't just driving, she was fighting back. As she backed out of the gas station, the bikers regrouped, their laughter replaced by shouts of anger. One of them jumped onto his bike, revving the engine loudly. Carla didn't wait to see what they would do next. She shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator, her car surging forward onto the empty stretch of Highway 70. The headlights cut through the darkness, and the gas station grew smaller in her rearview mirror. But the bikers weren't done. She could hear the roar of their engines behind her, growing louder as they gave chase. Carla's heart pounded, but her mind was clear. She had to stay ahead of them, had to find a way to lose them. The road stretched out before her, long and desolate, with no signs of help in sight. She glanced at her phone, still on the passenger seat. If she could just get to a spot with signal, she could call for help. The bikers were gaining on her now, their headlights glaring in her mirrors. Carla's hands tightened on the wheel. She wasn't going to let them win. Not tonight. Not ever. Cutting through the tense air, Carla didn't drive off. Not yet. Instead, she held her ground, her foot hovering over the brake as her car idled. The message was clear. She wasn't running. The group hesitated, their confidence wavering in the face of her defiance. But just as one of them moved to speak, Carla did something none of them expected. She rolled down the window just enough to let her voice carry. "If you don't move," she said, her tone steady and unyielding, "I will." But her next move wasn't what anyone was expecting, and it would change the dynamic of the encounter entirely. The bikers exchanged glances, their bravado visibly shaken by Carla's unwavering stance. The tall man, no longer leaning against her car, now stood a few feet away, his smirk faltering into something harder to read. The others hovered behind him, waiting for his lead. But Carla wasn't waiting for anyone. She calmly rolled her window down just a bit more and, with deliberate precision, lifted her phone so they could see it. The screen lit up with a number, already dialed, 911. She didn't press call, yet. Her eyes stayed locked on the man in front of her. "You think this is a game?" she said, her voice even. "Keep testing me." Her words weren't loud, but they sliced through the tension like a blade. For a second, the group froze. Then the man with the snake tattoo barked a laugh, but it sounded forced. "You think the cops care about you out here?" Carla raised an eyebrow. "Guess we're about to find out." But she wasn't bluffing, not entirely. She knew the dynamics at play here, and she also knew she had to shift the power dynamic. Quickly. Her other hand reached into her purse, and the faint metallic glint of something caught their attention. The bikers stiffened, their eyes darting to her hand. Carla didn't pull anything out, not yet. She let the implication hang in the air, her gaze never leaving the tall man's face. The tension was palpable, the night air thick with uncertainty. The bikers who had seemed so confident moments ago now looked uneasy. The tall man took a step back, his hands raised slightly in a gesture that was part surrender, part caution. "Easy now," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "No need to get crazy." Carla didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words. She kept her phone in one hand, her other still in her purse, her expression unreadable. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier swagger replaced by hesitation. The man with the snake tattoo muttered something under his breath, but no one laughed this time. The tall man took another step back, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the dim glow of the gas station lights. "All right, lady," he said, his tone softer now. "We're just messing around. No harm done, right?" Carla didn't lower her phone. "Move," she said, her voice firm. The bikers hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly began to back away. The tall man gave her one last look before turning and walking back to his bike. The others followed, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet unease. Carla watched them carefully, her hand still in her purse. She didn't relax until they were all on their bikes, the engines roaring to life. As they pulled out of the gas station, she finally lowered her phone and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her heart was still racing, but she felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had stood her ground, and it had worked. But as she glanced at her rearview mirror, she saw the bikers lingering at the edge of the gas station, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They weren't leaving. Not yet. Carla's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The tall man stiffened. "Whoa, whoa," he said, raising his hand slightly. "No need to get crazy." Carla tilted her head, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Crazy? You came looking for trouble, remember? So here we are." She wasn't holding a weapon, but the bikers didn't know that. The reflection of the gas station's lights off the object in her purse was enough to make them hesitate. Carla's pulse raced as she felt the tide beginning to turn. The bikers had relied on their numbers and intimidation, but they hadn't counted on someone standing their ground. The tall man took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "All right, lady, you've made your point." But Carla didn't back down. Instead, she opened her car door and stepped out, her posture calm but commanding. The bikers stared, stunned into silence. She stood tall, her presence suddenly larger. Then life. "Let me tell you something," she said, her voice clear and deliberate. "People like you thrive on fear. You think you can scare someone like me into silence, but not tonight." The group was no longer laughing. A few shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. The tall man opened his mouth to retort, but Carla cut him off, her tone sharp and unwavering. "You see this?" she said, holding up her phone. "It's recording everything you've said. Every move you've made, it's all on here. So go ahead. Give me a reason to hit send." The tall man's face darkened, but he didn't step forward. He knew the game had changed. Carla's calm resolve had unraveled their facade, exposing them for what they were, cowards who relied on numbers and fear. Behind her, the faint sound of a car engine approaching broke the silence. The biker's head snapped toward the road as a pickup truck pulled into the gas station. An older couple stepped out. They're curious, gazes flicking between Carla and the bikers. The presence of new witnesses seemed to drain the last of the biker's bravado. The tall man spat on the ground, his frustration barely contained. "Let's go," he barked to the others. "This ain't worth it." One by one, they climbed back onto their bikes, the rumble of their engines filling the night air. Carla didn't move, her eyes fixed on them until the last one disappeared into the distance. Only then did she let out a long, shaky breath. The older couple approached cautiously. "You all right, Mom?" the man asked, his voice gentle. Carla nodded, her composure returning. "I am now. Thanks for stopping." As the couple lingered nearby, Carla felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had stood her ground, and it had worked. But as she glanced at her phone, she knew this wasn't over. The bikers might be gone, but the memory of their intimidation would linger. Carla took a deep breath and turned to the couple. "I think I'll be okay," she said, forcing a small smile. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "If you need anything, we're here," she said. Carla thanked them again and watched as they walked toward the store. She knew she had been lucky tonight, but she also knew she couldn't rely on luck forever. She had to be smarter, more prepared. As she got back into her car, Carla glanced at her phone. The screen was dark. She hadn't actually been recording. But the bikers didn't need to know that. She had used their fear against them, and it had worked. For now, that was enough. Carla climbed back into her car, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. But a sense of triumph swelled within her. She had stood her ground and won. As she drove away, her thoughts lingered on the deeper meaning of the night's events and the lesson she hoped others could take from it. The road stretched endlessly before her, the darkness broken only by the occasional glow of her headlights. The adrenaline that had fueled her during the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a quiet reflection. She replayed the scene in her mind, the bikers' sneers, their laughter, the way they had backed down when she stood firm. Her pulse was still faintly elevated, but this time there was no fear, only resolve. She glanced at her phone resting on the passenger seat. The recording was still running, capturing every word, every action, every moment of that tense encounter. Carla stopped the recording and saved the file. Part of her wanted to delete it, to let the night fade into the rearview mirror like so many other unpleasant memories. But another part of her, the part that had taken a stand, knew this was bigger than just her. The bikers had retreated this time, but what about the next person they tried to intimidate? The thought burned in her mind. Carla wasn't the type to seek conflict. But tonight had shown her that staying silent wasn't always an option. Maybe this recording could serve as evidence, or perhaps as a reminder of the strength it takes to stand tall when the odds seem stacked against you. The faint glow of the next town's lights appeared on the horizon, and Carla decided to pull over at a small diner. She parked her car, letting the hum of the engine subside, and stepped out. The cool night air brushed against her face, a welcome contrast to the tension she had just endured. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, save for a waitress behind the counter and an elderly man sipping coffee at a booth. The waitress greeted her warmly. "Rough night?" she asked, noticing the tension still lingering in Carla's shoulders. "You could say that," Carla replied with a small smile. She ordered a cup of tea and took a seat by the window, staring out into the quiet night. The confrontation had rattled her, but it had also reminded her of something she'd nearly forgotten: the power of courage. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from her younger sister, Denise. The text read, "Call me when you get home. Just wanted to check in on you." Carla smiled faintly, feeling a wave of gratitude. She typed back a quick reply, "Will do. Love you." As she sipped her tea, Carla's mind wandered. She thought about the bikers, about the way they had tried to intimidate her. She thought about the older couple who had pulled into the gas station, their presence tipping the scales in her favor. And she thought about the recording on her phone, a small but powerful reminder that she had faced fear and come out stronger. The waitress returned with a refill, breaking Carla's reverie. "You look like you've been through a lot," she said kindly. "Anything else I can get you?" Carla shook her head. "No, thank you. This is perfect." She paused, then added, "Sometimes you just need a moment to breathe." The waitress nodded knowingly. "Well, you're safe here. Take all the time you need." As Carla sat there, the warmth of the tea soothing her nerves, she realized something important. The night hadn't just been about standing up to the bikers. It had been about reclaiming her own strength, about refusing to let fear dictate her actions. And as she looked out at the quiet road ahead, she knew that this was a lesson she would carry with her, not just for herself, but for anyone who might need it. Carla sat in the diner, her tea cooling in front of her as she stared out the window. The night's events replayed in her mind, but now, instead of fear or anger, she felt a quiet determination. She realized she hadn't told anyone about the bikers, not her family, not the friends she usually confided in. Part of her wanted to keep it that way, to tuck the experience away and move on. But deep down, she knew this was a story worth sharing, not for attention, but to remind people, especially women like her, that they didn't have to live in fear. Her thoughts were interrupted when the elderly man in the booth spoke up. "Miss," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Saw you. Pull up. You all right?" Carla turned to him, surprised by his concern. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "I am. Thanks." The man nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Sometimes the world will test you in ways you don't expect, but it's how you stand that tells the story. Carla's lips curled into a small smile. "You're right about that." As the man returned to his coffee, Carla felt a sense of calm settle over her. The events of the night still lingered, but they no longer weighed her down. Instead, they felt like proof of her resilience, a reminder that she was stronger than the circumstances she faced. But Carla also knew that strength wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about what came next. It was about the responsibility to use her experience to inspire others. She thought about the recording on her phone, the one she had used to bluff the bikers. It wasn't just a tool for that moment. It was a symbol of her refusal to back down. Maybe, she thought, it could be more than that. Maybe it could be a way to show others that they too could stand tall. The waitress approached with a warm smile, refilling Carla's tea without being asked. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," she said gently. Carla nodded. "I do, but I think I know what I need to do." The waitress gave her an encouraging nod before moving on. To another table, Carla pulled out her phone and opened her social media app. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. Then, with a deep breath, she began to type. She didn't share the recording, not yet, but she wrote a post, carefully choosing her words. She described the night in broad strokes, focusing not on the fear but on the strength she had found. She wrote about the importance of standing up for oneself, of refusing to let intimidation win, and she ended with a simple message. "You are stronger than you think." When she hit post, Carla felt a wave of relief. It wasn't just about sharing her story. It was about reclaiming her power. She knew not everyone would understand, and some might even criticize her for speaking out. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the possibility that her words might reach someone who needed to hear them. As she finished her tea and prepared to leave, the elderly man caught her eye. Again, he gave her a small nod, as if he understood exactly what she had been thinking. Carla returned the nod, a silent acknowledgement of the wisdom he had shared. She left the diner feeling lighter, the weight of the night's events transformed into something purposeful. The road ahead was still dark, but Carla no longer felt alone. She had faced her fear, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose. As she drove home, she thought about the women who might read her post, the ones who might feel a little less afraid because of her words, and for the first time that night, Carla smiled, not just for herself, but for them.